Greetings. This is Seraphim Hanish, American in exile, back after a long break. I am broadcasting still from Moscow in Russia in Russian Federation, and I want to give an update and weigh in on a few issues that might be of interest to all of you as watchers and listeners. First of all, I want to say why I've been gone away for so long. For anybody who might have been curious about this, it had nothing to do with any kind of pressure from forces in the Russian government or anything else. It simply was this. I found that in trying to keep track of geopolitical issues, it seemed like it was a race to, how to get attention, how to give analysis maybe quicker or better than the next guy. And the question became for me more and more, what is it that I have to say that actually hasn't been said by anybody else? Is there something that I need to say that is not being said by anybody else? And there were many times I wanted to do a video, and then after thinking about it more and more, it seemed like it was not really a productive idea to do so, because it would just take up my time and I wouldn't be offering anything that's terribly different than what anybody else has to offer. I think there is a little bit of a change in that, and that is part of the reason why I'm doing this broadcast now. The other reason I'm doing this program now is simply because it's been kind of on my mind for several weeks or longer that I should probably do one, and that maybe the things that I have to say might be useful, especially to Americans and Westerners that are looking at situations in their own lands and around the world, particularly in Russia, and they might benefit by hearing the things that I have to say from the perspective that I offer here. So with that in mind, I'm going to try to talk about these topics today. We're going to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war. We're going to talk about Pride Month. We're going to talk about what I call geopolitical misery. And finally, I think we're going to talk about President Trump. So these places in the video I hope to have marked so you can skip ahead to those places that you want to listen to if you wish, to save a little bit of time. And I will try to keep my comments brief as possible, but I'm not known for brevity, so strap yourselves in. You're going to be in for a ride. So the first theme I want to talk about is the Russia-Ukraine war. We have, in my observation, let me tell you what news sources I have access to here in Moscow. I certainly have access to the Russian news sources, RIA Novosti, RT, any other Russian news source that's actually in country without having to go through VPNs. There are supposed Russian sites that are like dissident sites, such as Medusa, which you have to go through a VPN to get to, because Medusa is very anti-President Putin. And I think they got blocked because Roskomnadzor, the internet watchdog in this country, probably saw that as something that would be bad for the country's morale in a time of war. I'm not sure if Medusa was blocked before the war. I don't remember. It probably was, but it's certainly blocked now. There are other also dissident news sources. Oddly enough, the news sources that Russia allows through sometimes don't make any sense. For example, CNN is violently anti-Russian, and you can get to it without the use of a VPN. Fox News, on the other hand, is about half and half. Some people are really pro-Ukraine. Some people are more in taking the line that President Trump does and that I do. And for some reason, Fox News is blocked. You have to go through a VPN to get to it. And there are certainly other sources, Newsmax, there's the new one, News Now, I think it is, or this there's some pretty good independent media networks that are getting launched on the internet, at least on YouTube. I have access to YouTube, though I have to use a VPN to get to it with any speed, because there was a flap several months ago where the alleged allegation was that Roskomnadzor was blocking YouTube. They were saying that Google wasn't maintaining its servers in Russia. It's not really clear which way it goes, but the current state of things is that I can use YouTube through a VPN that has a Russian VPN host. And there, YouTube works fine. In fact, the whole internet works about half speed of what I normally use. And that's very good because I have a gigabit connection. And so half a gigabit connection is still extremely fast, and I can usually function very well with that. So let's talk about what's actually going on. Well, the war is continuing. If you're looking for big land gains and all that kind of stuff, like in the manner of the first Iraq War or historical conflicts where the good guys make vast advances and take up huge amounts of land and all that. If you're looking for that in this war, you're not going to find it. This is what is called a war of attrition, and the Russian side has several overlapping objectives that it sees that it needs to do. One is to demilitarize Ukraine, which means that the Russian forces need to actually destroy Ukraine military emplacements, batteries, the weapons, all that kind of stuff. They need to, basically demilitarize it. They need to denazify it, which means that there is an ideology in Ukraine that is very reminiscent of what happened in Germany in World War II. Only the thing is that the targeted scapegoat people are not Jewish people, but they are Russian speakers. And so this is something that the Western media simply refuses to acknowledge as being true. So the first topic we're going to look at is the Russia-Ukraine war. We're going to talk about the propaganda aspects of it, the actual action of both sides, what I see, and some comments about both President Zelensky and President Putin. The propaganda in the West is the first most important thing that we have to deal with, especially as this program is directed towards people who live in the West. And I will try to say some things here that you may not know. Okay, so for example, the definition of targeting in the view of the Russian Federation is that only military targets shall be struck. So, and I guess you could probably say that the Ukrainians have the same kind of claim, that only military targets should be struck. But let's take a little deeper look into what is a military target as seen by people on either side, and I think you'll see where there is a problem. For the Russians, the stated point of view is that a military target is a weapons emplacement, a place where weapons are made, a place where weapons are stored, a place where people, especially if they are NATO personnel, which are not supposed to be in Ukraine at all, if there are NATO personnel operating in Ukraine for strategic planning or anything like that, those people are also considered a military target because they are actually involved in the combat process. Also, of course, soldiers, groups of soldiers, troops, platoons, whatever. Anything that is a fighting person is a target in the Russian view. In the Ukrainian view, it appears to be a little bit different. While all of those things are true, the Ukrainians also seem to view that anybody that is a Russian speaker or anybody that has sympathies or potential sympathies towards President Putin and his way of looking at things, these too are military targets. And so this is something that we need to understand, because while both sides are sending drones in huge amounts, each towards the other, the drone targeting from Russian sources is directed at military targets, maybe even drone operators in Ukraine or other places where these operators are functioning. And again, there's no plan or intention or desire to strike at Ukraine civilians at all. Okay? 0%. And now I'm telling you this because the American news media is spending a lot of time saying something totally different, that Russia is blowing up civilian places and all of this. Now, to be sure, the Ukrainians appear to be doing some of their basing activity in places where civilians live. So it's kind of like using the civilians around them as something like a human shield, because if they get hit and civilians are there and they happen to get injured or killed, then the Ukrainians can use their very adept public relations apparatus to make the claim, with at least a modicum of truth, that Russia is attacking civilians. But this is not true. Russia is attacking military people, and the military people are purposely holed up in places where there are civilian population groups, and this happens quite a lot. The second thing is that the drone attacks that are being directed here are in no way military emplacements at all. In fact, I can speak to this personally, because about a week ago, on the 22nd, I believe it was, on May, we had a drone get shot down almost right over my home. I was with my wife and kids, and we were doing something, playing around, and I heard anti-aircraft fire, pa-doom, pa-doom, really deep, loud, and then a deeper explosion. That was this drone that I eventually, after a couple of minutes, located the detonation cloud where the drone was. There was no real wind that day. And the cloud was probably about 1,000 feet above us, almost straight above us. And my neighborhood is not a military enclave at all. It is totally a residential area. There are a couple of large parks. There are apartment buildings, grocery stores, post office. There's absolutely nothing military in our area whatsoever. And the further you go towards the center of Moscow, the more increased population density you get, which is mostly like that. Now, there are military emplacements in the center of the city. Certainly the Kremlin is something that is a military target, I would imagine, and there are army facilities in areas not too far from the center of the city that probably could be considered as targets as well. But the drone attacks don't look for those. They actually deliberately go to apartment buildings in various parts of the city and explode. Usually, thankfully, they usually don't hurt anybody or kill anybody, but they do occasionally hurt a few people. Once in a while, they kill somebody. They cause damage to the buildings. They cause damage to neighborhoods and all this kind of stuff. And the whole motive, in Moscow anyway, for these attacks seems to be to try to terrify the people that are here, ostensibly maybe to make them want to overthrow President Putin or something, because, it's not working. It's flat out not working. The only thing it really seems to be doing is making people mad. And that's not a good thing for Ukraine. It's actually not a good thing for Russia either, because it's taking what was a special military operation and turning it into something that is more like a real grudge match. And, when you get personal anger involved in something like this, then it's easy to make mistakes. So far, Russia has been extraordinarily methodical and steering clear of temptations to act in an emotional manner or a reactive manner. They've done very well with that, because they know that that's what the West is trying to provoke them to do, to act emotionally so that they can be pinned as the bad guy. And so far, they're doing a pretty good job avoiding that. in the United States, though, we don't get any story like that. And in fact, in some cases, I need to call your attention to a report that happened about a year or two ago, where Lindsey Graham met with Zelensky in Kiev and talked about how this was the best money we ever spent because no Americans are dying, but Russians are dying, and the Ukrainians are fighting so Americans don't have to. I will include a section of that video here so that you can see it for yourself.
Free or die.
Free or die.
Now you are free.
Yes.
And we will be.
And the Russians are dying.
It's the best money we've ever spent.
Thank you so much.
But I expect in the coming days and weeks for the Ukrainian counteroffensive to yield results. And I'm here to tell you that the last chapter of the Battle of Bakhmut is yet to be written. I'm here to tell you that the Russian military is about to have holy hell unleashed upon them.
Okay, so this kind of thing, in more recent times, a couple of days ago, for example, Lindsey Graham was again, I think, in Europe or in Kiev, saying that the idea that Russia is winning the war is simply Russian propaganda, that Ukraine is winning the war. This is absurdity. Anybody that goes to the military summary channel or even pro-Ukrainian sources can see that 20% of what was considered Ukraine is now under Russian control. That percentage is slowly on the increase. There is no place that I know of where Ukraine is making any gains at this time. Sometimes they make little ones, but then they get pushed back again. And in some cases south, as Russia has opened up a couple of new fronts and is looking to create a security buffer zone, which I have to admit is kind of funny because, you know, how much is a security buffer zone going to be? And there was a map put up by Dmitry Medvedev, apparently, that showed almost the entire country of Ukraine as the buffer zone, except for a little tiny sliver of territory along the Polish and Western borders that was now called Ukraine, and the rest of it was a buffer zone. It was kind of a humorous dig. So it's very important as a Westerner to do a couple of things. CNN absolutely is in the bag for Ukraine. CBS, ABC, NBC, they're absolutely in the bag for Ukraine. And Fox has some sort of neutral reporting because they're trying to support Trump, and President Trump has definitely a Saint Ukraine policy in his mind. So Fox wants to support him. So to the extent that they can, to the extent that they have to in order to be supportive of his agenda, they are not really willing to glorify Ukraine as a network, though there are still plenty of anchormen and journalists at Fox that are still absolutely in the pro-Ukraine tank. To my knowledge, there is not a single one who has openly said, you know what, Russia is actually right in this, and this is something we need to pay attention to. They haven't quite gotten there, but they will report people like Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance saying as much. So they're at least carrying that. But most of the American networks have an investment in the idea that anything Russia is Cold War, Russia is communist. Like Rush Limbaugh used to say, Russia is always going to be the Soviet Union forever. I love Rush Limbaugh, absolutely love his analysis in most things. He's wrong on this one, though, unfortunately. And hopefully he sees that now. But, it's an understandable analysis, but it is not correct. I wouldn't be living in Russia for these last 10 years if I had come into a communist enclave. I am not a fan of the Soviet Union. I am not a fan of communism. I came here because things were much more free to live as a Christian in Russia than they were in the United States in 2015. And I would still say that is probably still the case, even though I've seen some real signs of improvement in the U.S. from my visit there about a year ago. So, propaganda. If you want to try to get the best way to evaluate the war is to do your homework. And so, by all means, if you want to listen, this is just my opinion and advice. If you want to listen to and read CNN and Fox and all the major networks, do so. But if you want to get a chance at having a fair view, like an objective view, rather than a passionate one, I would suggest checking out YouTube's military summary channel. I'll put the link there, or there will be a note here in the video. Military summary channel is one very good place. They try to aggregate reports from mappers that are pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, and neutral, so that they get an accurate idea of what is going on in the war. Its commentator, Dmitry Dima, he does the best he can with what he has. He does occasionally make mistakes in his prognoses, but that's something that we will get to later in this report. Everybody makes mistakes, and the thing that the Military Summary Channel offers, though, is basically a real-time, twice-a-day report about what the situation is on the ground and the kind of things that are going on. And if you aggregate those reports, you will find that Russia has been on the advance pretty much all the time since the 2023 summer counteroffensive that Ukraine attempted a couple of years ago, where they got back a little of their territory, and then Russia has been pushing back ever since, and I think they've since gotten all of that territory back and then some, and they're now continuing to advance in other parts of the combat area. Okay, so Military Summary Channel, the Duran. I write for the Duran occasionally. I post for the Duran. This video will be found on the Duran, I'm sure. But in particular, pay attention to Duran's top two guys, Alexander Mercouris, who is the editor-in-chief, and Alexander Christoforou, who is like the main guy, editor. These two give commentaries on the situation multiple times in the day. They are very educated bits of analysis. Sometimes they aren't right either, but they are more consistently correct about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine than anybody else I know who does commentary. The other commentary people that are pretty good, Scott Ritter, Douglas McGregor, Brian Berletic of New Alice, all of these guys are very good. However, one of the things that I would watch for is that one of the things all of these commentators keep trying to go to is they will talk about this line, the ultimate capitulation or collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces. And that line has been going on ever since this war started. There have been no capitulations on large scale of the Ukrainian armed forces in any part of the theater of combat. What there have been are slow, very heavily and hard fighting for small regions, sometimes a little bigger than small, but nothing enormous. The Ukrainians are fighting very, very hard, and the Russians are fighting very, very hard. These guys are on both sides. They have a warrior class that would probably make Westerners shudder, and that is part of the reason why it is these two groups that are at war, because as George Soros once pointed out about having Ukraine fight Russia, the Europeans have no stomach for a long-range, long-duration, protracted military conflict with millions of lives lost on both sides. The Europeans have no stomach for this. The Americans have no stomach for this. But the Russians and the Ukrainians do. And that is why things have been manipulated to get these two fighting each other, because, in reality, Europe hates them all. Don't think for a minute. Now, you can. This is my thought, okay? So I'm going to say it strongly. Take it with a grain of salt. Of course, in the same way that I'm saying do research about the war, do research about what I say too, because I absolutely claim the right to be wrong. But this is what I see. Europe right now looks like they're all warm and fuzzy about Zelensky, but the Ukrainian refugees that flowed into the European countries have been a source of a lot of problems. And it is not far off the base to say that the attitude of Europeans in general towards Ukrainians is the only reason that they have a better attitude about them than Russians is because they're not Russians. But they're Slavs. They are considered as second-rate people, and that the world would be better off without them. So having them at war with each other kind of takes care of the problem for many European people, because they're killing each other, and so that means fewer Ukrainians and Slavs and Russians around, so somehow that is good. So I think this is something that might be a little bit of a shock. It's a shock to me because I like both people. I know people from both countries. They are my friends. The Ukrainians that I know, for the most part, are generally supportive of the Russian side of the war, which is interesting. But there are some that are supportive of the Ukrainian side, of course, and some of them feel very patriotic about it. But the thing is that these are fine people. They're good people, but they've been driven to madness, especially on the Ukrainian side, in my view. They've been driven to madness very carefully by little pushes and shoves from the West with promises of money, of getting a country like the rest of Europe, being a wealthy country when Ukraine is really, really poor and really corrupt. So I think that it's been a losing proposition for both sides, and a proposition that Europe is secretly rejoicing in, because the Ukrainians are taking care of two problems at once. They are taking care of reducing a large number of Russian people from the earth, and they are reducing an even larger number, I think, of their own kind from the earth. And so that's kind of bad, isn't it? Not too many people that are going to say that. I hope it's not true, but I've heard a lot of things that indicate that it is true. And, this is another little myth that I, sidetracked about Europe itself. Now, I don't know how many Westerners, especially, have traveled to Europe. For living in Russia, I have to admit that I am not very well traveled in Europe at all. The only European nation besides Russia that I've spent significant time in is Finland. And Finland is, I stayed most of my time in both cases in Helsinki. And Helsinki is it's a beautiful city, but it's almost indistinguishable from any large city in the United States. Everybody speaks English, though they also speak Suomi and other languages. And the part of Helsinki where I was staying was like a big shopping mall. So it was kind of like going to Cherry Hill in Denver, the big shopping mall for people with very expensive tastes. This was my experience in Finland. The people are very nice. They're very secularized. I would say even more so than Americans are. And, I've been through, I've traveled through airports mainly, basically, in other countries in Europe, England, Paris, so London, Paris, Zurich, Munich, and, a couple of other places. So this, I don't know a whole lot about how Europe responds to each other, but some things that I'm told from people that live there or have experience suggest that the European Union is not the same thing as something like the United States of Europe, where everybody is really on friendly terms and everybody travels state to state. There is some of that, but there is a lot of conflict and a lot of people in one country despising people from another country and so on, and it goes all over the place. A lot of the old animosities still exist, but they are covered up under this economic and political union without these original things being dealt with. So it's not like the United States, where at most you might have a little rivalry between places like Texas and California or Texas and Colorado, where people are more at the level of humor and not so much at the level of bitter recriminations and accusations of one another. But I've heard that the latter is sometimes the case with European nations. So just something also to consider and check. See if I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. Comment about it. Tell me how, as in all of this, tell me how I'm wrong or tell me how I'm right. I'm just giving what I see. So the next two things that I want to cover, I think I covered a couple of these all as in one. I want to talk about President Zelensky. I get a lot of conflicting opinions, especially in Russia, because that are not without truth. A lot of people point out that Zelensky is kind of a vassal or a servant of the Americans, of the Europeans, but mainly the Americans, because the Americans are the chief funder of NATO. If the United States withdrew from NATO, probably NATO itself would disintegrate, because the United States has been the country responsible for the lion's share of support of NATO. So, therefore, NATO support means American support. So NATO support of Zelensky means that the Americans are supporting Zelensky. And this was certainly true in the Biden administration, because Biden was breaking his back to say aggressive things about President Putin. My God, this man cannot remain in power. This kind of thing. Or for God's sake. And remember the red speech, and all of this kind of stuff. I think this was at the same time. And so Zelensky got hailed by the American Congress as some sort of a hero when he actually hadn't won anything. All he did was manipulate public opinion very well. He's an actor. He's good at it. He's very good at it. And I should say that when I was living here before Zelensky became president, when he was a candidate, I was supporting of him for a couple of reasons. I liked him as an actor, and I made the mistake of thinking that the characterization that I saw in him as an actor in one movie was a good representation of the character of the man in real life. He has a pleasant face and look about him. He's kind of funny. He's a comedian. He's pretty funny. And so when he showed up as an unlikely presidential candidate that wanted to bring peace between Ukraine and Russia and to keep his hands off of the dealings of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, he had my support. And then he became president and went completely the other way. Anyway, a lot of attitudes in Russia are that Zelensky is a puppet of the United States and that Trump wants him to do whatever it is that Zelensky ends up doing. I cannot agree with this. And I don't know if that cannot is because of my own blind hopes, because I really like President Trump, may be true. But I see something very different. I've seen President Trump be very critical of Ukraine. We all saw the White House meeting which ended with Zelensky being basically thrown out of the White House. So I don't think that President Trump is an acolyte of Zelensky, and I don't think Zelensky is an acolyte of Trump. I think Zelensky is very clever, and he's blessed with a good sense of self-preservation, and he knows that if he doesn't preserve what he's doing, he's probably not going to be around anymore to lament losing. So for that reason, he constantly tries to woo Europe and woo the United States, and he had so much success with the American Congress during the Biden years that most of those congressional people in both parties, Republican as well as Democrat, are still very supportive of him. So this is a big issue. The American people, so far as I have talked to, seem to be either rather ambivalent about the war, or more like Trump's attitude, why is this ours? We don't want to be involved in this. Or in the case of the more conservative of Orthodox Christian people, like I am, and like the Orthodox Church is active in the United States and apparently growing very rapidly there. A lot of the people that I run into have all been in support of Russia. I've not met a single Ukraine supporter in the Orthodox communities that I have been a part of, except one. And, so one out of several thousand is not very much. That said, I know that there are a lot of people in the Greek Orthodox Church that seem to be more supportive of Ukraine, probably because the ecumenical patriarch has had his hands in all of this. And so they accept information that's coming from their sources that would probably lift Ukraine's reputation over Russia quite a lot, because there's also a feud between the ecumenical patriarch and the Moscow patriarch. So, the church is kind of split in its alignment or agreement with, are you in alignment with the Greek patriarch, the ecumenical patriarch that is, or are you in alignment with Moscow? And this has the church somewhat split in opinions. It's not a schism in the church, but it's two different political points of view. So I see Zelensky at this point as an independent actor. He seems to be throwing monkey wrenches in the Americans' efforts, particularly President Trump's efforts, to bring a negotiated end to the conflict. He doesn't want it. And he doesn't, and to give you a little information, maybe you guys didn't know this, but you probably heard a lot of the news reports about ceasefires, that Ukraine wants a 30-day unconditional ceasefire before they start to negotiate. You probably heard that report many, many times. But have you heard the report, there are several reports, that there have actually been 3 ceasefires in the last 2 months in this conflict. There was a ceasefire against energy and infrastructure objects, targets, that President Putin got from President Trump got from President Putin and Zelensky. They both agreed to it. Russia, for their part, did not attack any energy and infrastructure targets in Ukraine for 30 days. Ukraine attacked all kinds of energy and infrastructure targets in Russia during that 30 days, including a place that is a concurrent project between Russia and the United States for oil or gas extraction or transport. So the Ukrainians did not follow that ceasefire. The second ceasefire was also announced by President Putin, that the forces would call a truce for Pascha, for Easter. Okay, Easter in the West, we call it Pascha as Orthodox Christians, and all of you Orthodox Christians out there know that. But we all celebrated this holiday on the same day this year. It doesn't happen very often, but it happened this year. And so even though Ukraine decided to move all of its official church activities to the Western calendar, Easter for them was the same as it is in Russia. So it was April 20th. President Putin said, we're going to cease fire for Pascha, and we invite Ukraine to do the same. Russia did the ceasefire, Ukraine did not. They refused. So by order of Zelensky. Okay? So then the third ceasefire came, where this was for the May 8th, May 9th Victory Day celebration, and President Putin announced a several-day ceasefire, a truce, that the Russians would not continue their forward attack during the time from May, I believe it was midnight May 7th in the morning through midnight May 10th in the morning. This allows for people that celebrate Victory Day as VE Day, May 8th in Europe, ostensibly perhaps Ukraine if they wanted to celebrate it on the 8th, the Russians on the 9th, and a little bit of breather before and after. I think it was actually the ceasefire ended on the midnight going into the 11th. I could be wrong about that. If I am, you'll see the correction in titles here. So Russia did that unilaterally, and what Zelensky did in response was to warn the people in Moscow that anybody in Red Square during the Victory Parade celebration better not take their security or their safety very much for granted, because anything could happen. That was his response. So this was an astounding response, because at the Victory Day Parade, we had the president of China, we had, I believe, the president of Kazakhstan, we had people from, we had President Fico, we had Vucic from Serbia, and we had a lot of other leaders, Vietnam, African nations, a whole lot of world leaders were gathered for the Victory Day Parade and celebration in Moscow. And Zelensky was threatening it. Do you know that? You should know that. And if you now are surprised by the things that I'm telling you, this ought to be a signal that you may want to get on the phone with your representatives or your senators and tell them, hey, what's going on here? Why don't I know all this stuff? Melt the lines. You know, because what we've got is a real propaganda thing going on that isn't right. And so Russia's tried ceasefiring several times. They've done it, and the Ukrainian leadership has simply refused to accept it. Now, that being said, one of the things that is a problem with such a thing as an unconditional ceasefire before negotiations, I'll give you this as a rundown. The winning party in a war can make such a term. They can make such an order if they want to, but the losing party traditionally does not. Because why? Well, if you're losing the war and you get the winning side to stop pushing you, then you have time to breathe, you have time to rearm. And yes, it is true that if the Russians, as the winning side, if they do a pause, they also have certainly time to re-equip and rearm. So yes, it does go both ways. And the propaganda, unfortunately, the propaganda attack here sometimes is that, well, Ukraine will do it and Russia won't have a chance. It's as if Russia won't have a chance. It's not true. Russia would actually have a chance. But the outcome of the ceasefire 30 days would be probably something like this. This is where the trick goes. Well, the ceasefire gets to 30 days, and then Ukraine complains about something else by which it cannot start negotiations, and then it keeps Russia waiting if Russia agrees, and then Russia complies to that condition, and then Ukraine has another complaint, and so on and so on and so on. In that sense, this is something that is not good. Now, sure, both sides can rearm and be ready to go more and more and more the more this strings out. But what it also does is it prevents the conflict from being resolved. Russia wants to address what they call the root causes of the conflict. And the root causes are these. NATO expanded well beyond the limits that were offered in a verbal only promise or statement that was made, where NATO wanted to go into Germany, and there was an agreement, a verbal agreement only, that NATO would not expand 1 inch east of Germany after Germany became a NATO power. And of course, that's been violated over and over and over again, well before Ukraine. Poland, a lot of the European Union countries that are Slavic countries, that are Eastern European countries, and most recently Finland, Sweden, and so on. So the effect is like building a fence around Russia, and instead of it being like the scandal that happened in 1962 when the Soviet Union sent rockets and emplacements and launchers to Cuba 90 miles off the Florida coast, which is what triggered a real threat of a nuclear conflict in the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was 90 miles away. Ukraine is right on the border. And Russia sees that and says, absolutely no way is this going to happen. We're not going to have NATO sitting on our border. They already do with cases like Poland, I think, and Finland. But the thing about Poland and Finland is that those countries don't have strong military forces. And while Poland doesn't like Russia very much, and Finland doesn't like Russia very much, those countries had not been excited to a nationalist fervor like Project Ukraine was. So the Ukrainians are looking for a fight, at least in terms of the leadership and some of the people. And that looking for a fight has been something inculcated in those people for 30 or 35 years. It's not really exactly the same in the other two countries, so that's probably why Russia doesn't really say much about them. So let's go to President Putin. And I've said a lot, so some of the things that I probably have to say about President Putin were in a sense already covered. But President Putin is an interesting fellow. He tries to keep a very pragmatic view of what's going on. He is, I think, blessed with a sense of emotional detachment. Now, some people might call that being cold, but I'm not referring to coldness at all. I'm referring to the fact that he's not one to react on his emotions almost all the time. When something horrible happens in Russia at Ukraine's hands, he doesn't say, I'll show you, and then, hit a huge power punch. There's been one warning strike with an Oreshnik missile system, and we haven't seen a second one. There has been this very steady strategy, never deviating from the main points. We want demilitarized Ukraine, denazified Ukraine. Ukraine must be a neutral power, not a NATO power. And the lands that Russia took all had referendums, particularly the Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. They all had elections. And the topic of those elections in September 2022 was, do you wish to be with Ukraine or do you wish to be with the Russian Federation? In all four of those territories, the vote was very strongly to be with the Russian Federation. Kherson was the least, and it was still something like 57 to 62% in favor of joining the Russian Federation. That's a big majority. The others, Donetsk and Lugansk, were in the 90s, and I think Zaporozhye was in the 80s or 70s. It was very strong majorities. It's not a 51-49 or a 50-50. It was very strongly. And so for that reason, because the people in those countries voted for that, it is understood, in those territories, it is understood that those territories belong to the Russian Federation and that the Ukrainians need to clear out their troops from the remaining emplacements in those lands that they still hold, because they're, I think, about half of Kherson, half of Zaporozhye, a little bit of Donetsk, and a little tiny bit of Lugansk still have Ukrainian troops in them. So they would have to get out. And, in fact, it was announced not long ago that Russia would be happy to stop fighting if they just merely did that. Get out of lands that have already voted to become part of Russia, that are, by order of the Constitution of the Russian Federation, are now considered part of Russia. Go away from those places, leave them alone, and we'll be happy to stop. So that's President Putin. One of the criticisms that comes from the West is that President Putin's side and President Zelensky's side are so irreconcilable, and that Russia is going to have to give up on something. And this is a little bit of bad news, perhaps. But these principles, or these ideas that Russia is looking for, that President Putin has stated and others in his administration have stated, is very consistent. These are the basic things. If Ukraine doesn't comply with them, they will lose more land. And in fact, at the Istanbul talks a couple of weeks ago, that is exactly what was said. If you don't stop, you're not going to lose just one more territory. You will lose 4 or 5 more territories. So the Russians are driving a very hard line, and the West doesn't like it, because the West wants to see, it's not fair. They're saying it's not fair that Russia gets to get all it wants and Ukraine doesn't get anything that it wants. Clearly, Ukraine is not going to get Crimea back. They're not going to get it, even if they had it as stop at the lines of where the combat lines are now and call that de facto Russian territory, but not de jure, and give Crimea a de jure recognition as part of the Russian Federation. It's not enough. It's a nice move, but it's couched in the Western idea that there is a way to negotiate this that will get any kind of partial victory. And this is what the West is choking on. There is no way the West wins this one. None. Except for by letting Russia have what it wants and reestablishing diplomatic relations, full diplomatic relations, reestablishing commerce, full commerce, and getting on with it, because Russia is a great power. The United States needs Russia as an ally, as a partner, just the same as the United States needs China, and all of these three need each other very, very much. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about President Putin. He has been very, very balanced about this, which I said before. He has been very steady on these points, which I've said before. There was an interview with him, and it was kind of a puff interview, I guess, but there were still really interesting things about it. One was that President Putin showed the reporters his chapel in his living area in the Kremlin. He's got like an apartment kind of thing. It's kind of nice. It's very nice, actually, but he's got his own little chapel. He spends a lot of time in there praying. He's got probably priests that come in and serve liturgies and stuff like this. And he said that the situation with the war made him actually get on his knees for the first time in his life, because he had to pray. And so I think he is becoming a deeper Christian, a more prayerful man, because he really is like held up to the whole West as being this object to be hated and despised for no particular good reason. So as some of you that are watching this video are probably conservative Trump supporters, and I should tell you this: Russia is a very conservative country. It's a conservative, Christian-oriented nation. We don't have Gay Pride Month. We don't have LGBT people and transgender people running around all over the place, terrorizing our children, doing drag queen story hours. This is reviled, absolutely reviled by the Russian people. If somebody tried to do that, they'd probably get beaten up for it, because it's wrong. It's wrong to do that to our children. Children don't know anything about sex. They don't need to know anything about sex. And why are we getting these just, it's evil. I mean, in my opinion, it's just absolutely evil to have people that are literally flouting perversion in front of our most innocent people. Isn't what Christ said? Woe be to him who, or to him who would even harm one of these little ones. It would be better for him if a millstone was tied around his neck and he would be thrown into the sea. I mean, what's going on with this? How? You've got to think about this and ask yourselves, how does Drag Queen Story Hour benefit your children? How does it do that? How does getting a child confused about whether or not they're a boy or a girl, when, think about yourselves growing up, especially if you're in my age group in the 50s and 40s and stuff. Did you ever go around doubting what sex you were? Did you ever even think about that? Or was your life about going out and playing with your friends, or doing something like that? Or when you become a teenager, then you start thinking about what makes boys and girls different and all that kind of stuff, and all the traditional and whatever fun that we had with that. All of this stuff is so sick, and it's going on in the West, but it doesn't go on here. I noticed that as today is June 1st, and it's the beginning of Pride Month, I should point out that even those people that are promoting Pride Month can't even be honest, because they know that if they are honest about what it is they are saying we should be proud of, or, think about it. I'll get a YouTube strike if I get specific about what it is, but just think about it. What is it that the LGBT community is saying we should actually be proud of? And get biological, right? Really? And that's why they can't say it the way that it really is. Like Pervert Pride Month, Perversion Pride Month, LGBT Pride Month. Okay? So this is a problem in the United States that needs to get fixed. Thank God Trump did some things when he started signing executive orders to, get boys out of girls' lockers and, boys not playing in girls' sports and all that kind of stuff. Because it's just all, it's absolute madness. And, living here, I hope you find it refreshing the way that I say it, because it is. It's absolute madness. We don't have an equivalent. It's not going on here. Maybe it's going on in Europe, but it's not going on here, and we don't want it going on here. And I'll say this, Zelensky is kind of hailed as the poster child for the woke, but I really seriously doubt that even most of the people in Ukraine want that kind of stuff in their country. Yet here is Zelensky being wooed by the very people that are pushing it and trying to use Orthodox-looking church structures to try to introduce it. So that's a whole nother topic that would take us a lot longer. I've already been on this for over 50 minutes, so we're going a long way on this video. So anyway, President Putin has tried to steer Russia in a way that is towards the church, in a way, or at least away from all the ridiculous and quite frankly evil or dangerous elements of culture that the West has been promoting. And he should be given a lot of credit for that. At one point he was. I think the only thing that changed about President Putin was the American narrative, because at one point he was kind of like the darling of a lot of Americans. Not so long ago, 20 years ago, when George W. Bush was president, they were friends. We got treated to pictures of them playing with cars together and doing all kinds of things together and all this. And then all of a sudden, over time, President Putin becomes the apostle of doom or something. And he's not. He's just not. He's a good man. He's a good man. I think he's got complications in his life, but he's doing the best he can to protect his country and his people, and he has every right to do that. And I support him 100%. I support him in doing that. And I think that any American who likes Trump and would see that President Putin is only doing the same thing for Russia that Trump is trying to do for the United States. Keep it free, keep it independent, keep it sovereign. Same stuff. So, let's see. Okay, one more topic. I think I was going to cover Trump as an individual point, but I think it's probably so well incorporated in this that I don't need to do that. Other than to say that thank God that President Trump is president. He is a master at what he does. I think he sometimes scares me because I worry that he will be seduced by the bad narratives. But so far he's been remarkably consistent, and so I keep praying for him. And I hope that he continues to stay the course. And, the other day when he said, President Putin has gone crazy, I don't know what it is, then this also brings up an interesting point that someone asked President Trump after he said that, if maybe it was because of some particular attack that Ukraine had launched against Russia, or maybe it was the one against Putin himself, because President Putin was in the Kursk region and there was a drone swarm attack around his helicopters. And apparently there's a possibility that that attack was launched particularly because somehow or another the Ukrainian forces realized that President Putin was there. I don't know that that is true, because when President Putin travels, especially to that part of Russia, he usually does so. You never know he's there until he's already been there, and usually he's back in Moscow by the time we find out. The Russian media are able to slow walk stories like that. Right or wrong, that's what they do. So anyway, they asked President Trump if it maybe was because of this bad attack that Ukraine had done, and Trump said something very curious. He said, I haven't heard about that, but maybe that is the reason. So this says to me, if Trump has not heard about that, why hasn't he heard about that? Probably because most of the intelligence in the United States doesn't come from the intel agencies and their work directly. Read Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy notes in his fiction something that I think is true in reality, as most of it is, that the CIA and the other intelligence agencies often use media network sources as their main source of information. They try to develop information through their own agencies in other ways, but the media has gotten very good at catching things oftentimes before the professional intel agencies get it. So if Trump didn't know about this attack against President Putin, why is that? Is it because somebody deliberately did not tell him about it? And why, if so, why? Does that mean that maybe somebody deliberately did not tell him about it so as to get him angry, thinking that Russia was acting in a evil fashion, in a one-sided fashion? Because if that was the motive, it seemed to have worked, at least in the short run. However, the Russian side responded not too long after that. I believe it was Foreign Minister Lavrov, Sergei Lavrov, said it seems clear that President Trump is not getting all of the information he needs about what's going on in Russia, so we will help him with that. And apparently there was a call between Mr. Lavrov and Marco Rubio that probably covered those points. So Trump is an amazing, amazing person, and he deserves a lot of prayers. I've never seen somebody, maybe Reagan is the last time I've seen a president that is so dedicated to trying to get the country on its feet and to try to help people. Biden was not interested in helping people. I never really saw it. I don't know. He just was kind of there and doing things to make people, majority Americans' lives harder, if anything. But, flying in people in the middle of the night and dumping them off in towns and cities, open borders, all this kind of stuff. Biden's administration was set to destroy the United States. Trump is trying to put it back together. It amazes me that there's any opposition at all, but I guess it shouldn't be too amazing because there were a whole lot of people that voted for Biden, in addition to apparently the dead people and the non-existent people that voted for him in 2020. You might want to take a look at the election numbers for 2016, 2020, and 2024 and try to answer where did those 85 million votes come from when Trump won 2024, highly contested election with 71, 72 million votes. How did Biden get 85? Think about it. All right, last thing, geopolitical misery. All right, I've saved this topic for last, not for any particular reason. It was number 4 on my list. Trump was number 5. But geopolitical misery is something that I want to make a note of. In my observation, especially focused on the Russia-Ukraine difficulties, I see commentary for the Duran sites. I see commentary in RT, Fox to some extent, and I take notice of what people say there and on YouTube and everything like this. And much of what I see is so negative that it seems like it could be bots writing it or something like that. It's very, it goes along several themes. The Jews, the Americans, or the deep state. And the Jews and the Americans are the big two. Deep state is not that large in the comment threads that I see. No, it doesn't come up as much. The Jews and the Americans seem to go concurrently, and I hear that a lot around here. Trump is a Zionist, Zionist. And it's like, okay, look, I am not a Zionist. I don't really care about Zionism, but I understand it. I understand it as an Orthodox Christian. And that's one of the reasons I'm not a Zionist. But the overall tendency of a lot of geopolitical analysis is to go negative these days. Not just a little negative, but deeply negative. Like there's no hope, there's nothing good. All of this is a setup. We're all being used. We're all being lied to. Blah, 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 blah. And you could take two diametrically opposed pieces of news and say something like, President Trump says that President Putin is great. Oh, he's a lying Zionist pig. He's in league with the Jews. And And then the next day could be an article of President Trump praises President Zelensky for his sense of humor. Oh, it's a lying Zionist pig. You know, it's like the same thing, and it doesn't matter what the story is. So it seems to me that a lot of folks that do very good geopolitical analysis make a grave error because they actually think that they actually live like there is no God. They live like as analysis that this is a thing that people are going to solve. People are going to solve the war. People are going to solve all of the world's problems. After they solve the Russia-Ukraine war, then they'll solve Iran and China, and everything's going to be great, or everything is going to be really, really bad, and the United States is going to go to war with China, da 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 da. You see, you've heard stuff like this, I'm sure. Well, as a Christian, I can't subscribe to that. And I'm not saying that everything's wonderful and I just praise the Lord and the Lord is going to, woo, all this kind of stuff. It's not that either. But God made the world. He made all of us. And there is a tendency in the world for things to tend towards the good. When things go bad, they self-correct. Sometimes, though, when things are going pretty good, they rot. So this is the nature of the fallen world that we live in. And as much as I hate to see it when things go bad, and we've seen a lot of things go very bad over the last several years, 10 years or a little less, but especially in the last few years, it's very easy to despair. And one of the reasons that I wanted to make this video is to point out that there should not, I struggle with it too when I get a bunch of bad news things. It's very easy to despair, but this is what the devil wants us to do. It's not what God wants us to do, and God is in charge. He lets us do these things, but he subtly moves things. So we've seen some surprises. A few days before the Istanbul talks, it was all gloom and doom because, for example, Zelensky and Europe were giving Russia a 30-day ceasefire ultimatum, and it looked like Russia wasn't going to be able to do anything to both say no and still be seen as a legitimate, having a legitimate argument, and that it would show that Russia is not willing to settle the war, and so Trump should throw his alliance in with Zelensky and start sending huge numbers of weapons and press the war on the Ukraine side. But that didn't happen. President Putin offered to begin talks in Istanbul directly between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And that was a big lift. And then Zelensky started screwing around with it again and was trying to put conditions on it. Went to Istanbul, tried to talk to Erdogan, President Erdogan. That didn't work so well. And so after 3 hours of talking, Zelensky finally appointed a delegation to meet with the Russians, and they had a meeting. They presented their terms. Each side, certainly disagreed with those terms, but they did agree to 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner swap. They did agree to create documents of what a ceasefire proposal should be and what it would look like to be exchanged in a future meeting, and that future meeting is set to take place tomorrow. What will happen from that? I don't know. Do I feel encouraged by the fact that European and American leadership representatives are also going to be in Istanbul for some reason, even though they're not in these talks? I don't like it, but they were there last time too, and the conference went on just fine. So it's very important to not use the difficulties as an excuse to get into name-calling hatred. I don't hate the Jews. I don't hate Zionism. I think Zionism is a terrible mistake. I think that those Jewish people who are atheists, who are not placing God first, are making terrible mistakes. The ones that somehow are placing God first generally don't seem to be in favor of fighting in Gaza, right? Just something to think about. Like really Orthodox Jewish communities, people that are kibbutzing in that part of the world, because they think that that is what they need to do for their faith, and that, that this is where they're going to get close to God, and that they're going to do his will the best is by being in the Holy Land. And those people are not in favor of the war. So I think it's somewhat a lesser class of people, at least in terms of religious alignment. This leads to a point where I say that it's very easy to put things in front of following Christ. It's very easy to put things in front of Christianity and Christian teachings. Well, yeah, I know Christ says love your enemies, but look at these people, they're doing this. Justice must be served. And one of the great sayings, I'll put it as an ending frame for this video, is very significant, from Isaac the Syrian. And in it, it says, there is not a single thing in Christ's teachings about justice. Not one. It's about love, mercy, forgiveness. Geopolitics is all about justice, ultimately. It's all about justice and people trying to impress upon each other what justice should be and what it looks like. And yes, sometimes there is certainly a right side and a wrong side. I believe that is the case in the Russia-Ukraine war. I think Russia is in the right. I think Ukraine and the West are deeply in the wrong on this one. I think that is an element. I don't think I'm wrong. And the reason I think it's because the Russian side is aligned with Christianity in an ancient sense, with doing things the old way with the church. And the side of Zelensky is an atheist Jew. He's known for doing some very inappropriate things for comedy. And he is not a Christian. He's not even a religious Jewish person. He's an atheist. And so for him, he's like the poster child of the liberal West. If you notice those people that were demonstrating against Vice President Vance after he came back from the Munich Security Conference, and he went skiing with his family, those people were all, or no, it wasn't the Munich Security Conference. It was after the thing with Zelensky getting kicked out of the White House. There were people with Ukrainian flags, LGBT flags, and weird-looking hair, and all this kind of stuff. And Zelensky is their poster child, And I just happen to think that doing things that is perverted, a perversion of the will of God, I think that's wrong. I'm not saying those people are bad people, but they're certainly on the wrong track. And so justice doesn't come into this, not really. And a good study of geopolitics might be better as in terms of looking at this as the playing out of sacred history, because sacred history is still happening. It didn't end with the New Testament. It's still going on. God has his hands in everything that happens, either to abandon people to their will or to help them. And I think it's important not to despair. And not to call anybody names because they're different. Yes, the atheist Jewish people have their own agenda. I guess they want to take over the world. I think that's kind of silly. Why? Go ahead, take over it. And then what? You'll die. Like me, you're still going to die. You're not going to keep it. David the psalmist said just as much, I believe, or whoever wrote Psalm 145. When his breath departs, he returns to his earth, and that very day all his plans perish. That happens to every single one of us. So taking over the world seems like a silly proposition for any group, and it seems like an even sillier proposition for any group of people or any one person to want to do. It doesn't align with Christianity. It doesn't align with reality. And trying to do all these other weird things to be emancipated from the ancient rules that were imposed on us to control us, that's just nonsense. God sets us free. He sets us free by following his laws. Those laws are so that we are in alignment with his will, and in such an alignment, things tend to go a little better for us, even in a fallen world, than they do when we go against them. And that's just as simple as it is. It's not good person, bad person. It's being aligned with God or not being aligned with God. And I think that's what really matters. And to that extent, when geopolitical pundits forget that point, I think that they make mistakes. Uh, Sometimes if you get a geopolitical speaker that has a sense of humor, like for example, Alexander Christoforou has a wonderful sense of humor, and Makuris also has a very good sense of humor. And I think that speaks well of their faith, because they are both believing Christians. But it is hard for them in their line of work to keep a positive attitude all the time, I imagine. So those are some words that I want to leave with. Anyway, this is The American in Exile. That's me. And I hope that this program was in some way beneficial. And I don't know when the next one will be, but leave comments if you want something, if you want to hear about something. Let that be food for thought, and I'll make another video about it. Till then, God be with you, and may whatever comes in your life be a source of blessing and joy. Take care.